Cassie here. Welcome back to my channel. And today we are going to talk about something called negative communication patterns, which I am super excited to share with you guys because this is a concept that when I first heard about it, my mind instantly went to all the ways I can use this in writing, and it's really exciting and something that I don't think many people have heard of. So let's get into it. So negative communication patterns are basically 4 different ways in which people typically fail to communicate well. This is a concept introduced in this book called Re-Engage by Todd Wagner and John McGee. This is a book, it's a little like workbook kind of thing. I would so highly recommend this to any married couples out there. It's a Christian book series. However, I don't believe as of right now that this is a book that you can just buy on your own. I think what it is, it's basically a Bible study kind of thing that churches put on. So my church started doing re-engage groups. So my husband and I attend a marriage group every couple weeks, and we went through this re-engage series with our group. So I think right now that's the only way that you can get your hands on this book is through like a Bible study kind of thing at a church, if that church happens to be doing this. But if you can get this book, I would highly recommend it. It's really good stuff. But anyway, what I want to talk about today is what this book calls negative communication patterns. First things first, I'm just going to go through and read to you the 4 negative communication patterns and what they mean. So number 1 is withdraw and avoid. Withdrawal is an unwillingness to get into or stick with important discussions. This can be as obvious as leaving the room in the middle of a conversation or as subtle as shutting down emotionally. Avoidance is choosing not to address tough issues or have conversations that could be difficult. Rather than actually making peace, avoidance is faking peace. So that is negative communication pattern number 1. Number 2 is escalate. Escalation occurs when you respond negatively toward your spouse and the conversation continues to get more and more hostile. You may immediately think of escalation as a husband or wife or both yelling and screaming at each other, and it can often happen that way. But you can also escalate in more subtle ways, through sarcasm, name-calling, threats, and other forms of attack. You can do a lot of damage to your marriage in a short period of time if you are an escalator. That part always makes me laugh. Negative communication pattern number 3 is negatively interpret. Negative interpretation happens when you assign a motive to your spouse that is more negative than is really the case. Negative interpretation can also look like you asking a question and your spouse interpreting it as a negative statement. Oftentimes, people will negatively interpret in areas where there is some insecurity or if veiled comments were common in their family growing up. So I think the first 2 are kind of commonly discussed, like withdrawing and avoiding and escalating the situation. Those are pretty common. This negative interpretation one was really insightful to me to learn because that's definitely, I think, the one that I struggle with the most. I kind of tend to misunderstand things that my husband says to me as criticisms when he's just like making a statement or something. Like, for example, when we first got married, I'm not a very good cook, which it says right here that people will negatively interpret in areas where there's some insecurity. So I'm not a very good cook. And when we first got married, my husband would come home from work and I would be cooking dinner and he would immediately come in and start doing things with the meal, like adding spices and turning the stove down and stirring stuff. And to me, that was him saying that I'm not doing it good enough and that I'm doing a bad job cooking and that he has to come in and fix everything. And that's totally not how he meant it at all, but I was negatively interpreting it that way. So that's just an example for you in case that one was still a little confusing. Now, number 4 is invalidate. Invalidation occurs when you directly or indirectly dismiss, minimize, or put down the thoughts, feelings, or character of your spouse. It can look like picking apart your spouse's opinions or feelings instead of being sensitive and trying to understand their point of view. So again, if you can get your hands on this book, I would really, really highly recommend it. I can't read everything to you in that chapter, but there's just a lot of good stuff. After each negative communication pattern, it explains what it is, which is what I just read to you, and then it also says a better way. And then there's a paragraph saying what you can do instead of escalating or negatively interpreting, and how you can combat these patterns that you have. It also really helps you to get down to the bottom of why you have those patterns to begin with and where that came from. And it's just a really good book is what I'm trying to say. So read it if you can. So now the question we are asking is, how can we use this in our writing? Well, when I heard about this, I was instantly excited about the potential for using this in writing, because this can be such a great tool in adding believable conflict between characters, especially in a romance. I feel like avoidance and withdrawal is something that people are very familiar with, and that's kind of something that, at least from my experience when I'm reading a book or watching a show, it seems like that's the main go-to for adding conflict in a relationship. If you want there to be some tension and you don't want your characters to just be communicating really well, because usually when people are communicating well, things are going pretty smoothly in the relationship. That's why communication is like one of the most important things in a relationship, because if you've got that down, then you can pretty much work through any problem fairly easily. So if you want there to be tension and conflict in your relationship, you can't always have people communicating well. And I think people tend to default to, what does bad communication look like? Well, it looks like avoiding the conversation altogether, or withdrawing and, not being completely open. And that is one of the negative communication patterns, but there are also 3 more that are just as useful and maybe people haven't seen before. So it might be a little more interesting to read than the millionth time you've read someone storm out of the room in the middle of a conversation because the author has to add some conflict to the relationship. So I was really excited to hear about these other patterns of negative communication and how I can use them in my writing. And another tip is to be consistent, because I think everybody can do all of these things, definitely. I've done all of them many times in my life, but I think people do tend to kind of identify more with one over the other. For me, it's negative interpretation. That is one that I definitely see myself, now that I know about this, I catch myself doing it all the time. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're negatively interpreting right now. Stop it. So be consistent with your characters, give them a little bit of a backstory. Maybe this negative communication pattern that they have, whatever it is, maybe it came from their upbringing, or it could just be a flaw in their personality, or trauma that they've experienced, or other life experience. Get to the bottom of who your character is, what their personality is, and which negative communication pattern is most realistic for that type of person to have, which I will actually be talking about in a future video when we talk more about personality tests. And there are different personality types that are prone to avoidance, or prone to what's the other one? Invalidation, being a little insensitive and not understanding their partner well. So figure out who your character is, what their personal negative communication style or pattern is like, and remain consistent in that. Because again, people can do other things, and you can have your character do other things, but it will be more believable to your reader and help your reader to get to know your character better if they are consistent in how they handle things. I mean, I know I read books or watch movies all the time where I'm like, this character is being really dumb and I'm annoyed that they're avoiding this issue, but I'm not really surprised because that's who that person is. They are an avoider. They've always been that way because of, this thing that happened in their past, or the way their parents were. Like, it makes sense that their character would be like that. And then it doesn't make me mad that they're doing that, because it's very in character and believable. So anyway, when I read this, I felt like I struck a gold mine in just this awesome tool of how to add conflict to a story and have it not be so cookie cutter, because it's hard to add conflict to a story. It's hard to add flaws to your characters because you want them to be likable, and you don't want people to think your characters are just dumb or like, oh, they're just being so stupid, they're not talking to each other. You know, negative communication, poor communication doesn't have to just be no communication. It could be any of these other 4 things. So I just wanted to share that with you guys so that you can all have this little nugget of gold in your arsenal of writing tools, because I feel like I'm so much better equipped to write like a really good conflict-filled tension in a story. I said that strangely. Whatever. The point is, it's useful information and I wanted to share it with you, and I hope you guys got something great out of it. I talked about love languages recently. I'm talking about negative communication patterns in this video, and in a couple videos coming up, I'm going to be talking about using the Enneagram test for writing and using the 16 personalities test for writing. So if this kind of stuff is interesting to you, which it's fascinating to me as someone who loves psychology, I just can't get enough of this. So if it's interesting to you, stay tuned and make sure to subscribe, because I'm going to be talking about more of this kind of stuff coming up soon. And that's it. I'll see y'all next time and have a great day. Bye.